let's move on. We want to talk about Israel, actually inside of Israel, and the tremendous blowback that is happening to Prime Minister Netanyahu, despite the fact that he has now created a coalition government. Let's put this up there on the screen. Benny Gantz agreed to form a wartime coalition government with Netanyahu. This is from the Times of Israel. Some of the more controversial elements are actually sitting out the coalition over the demand that the prime minister actually oust the actual defense minister and others. For now, all, quote, non-wartime legislation has been suspended, including the judicial overhaul. Prime Minister Netanyahu and the unity leader announced Wednesday that they will have this coalition government that will remain as a national emergency government akin to what happened in the UK under Winston Churchill during World War II, and will remain in place until they believe that the quote-unquote time is over. Now, we don't yet know what all of that is going to look like, but it does come at a time when there is tremendous domestic outrage inside of Israel at Netanyahu. And just to give you an idea, these are some of the statements that are even coming out of the former defense ministry. Can we put this please up on the screen? Here, for example, the former defense minister says, "I have called on the opposition not to enter the government with Netanyahu, but to instead demand his resignation. He was warned several times. He did not let the chief of staff speak to the cabinet. There is no trust in him. How can you lead a people to war like this? Every hour he remains in office is a detriment to our country." That's the former defense minister, a right-wing defense minister, I would add. Also, the former Israeli military chief of staff also called on Netanyahu to resign. And one way that we know that this is organic also is from some of the videos that are coming out of Israeli ministers getting shouted out of public places. So here is one video that we're going to be able to play for everyone. Let's put it up there on the screen. Here we have the Israeli environmental minister who's visiting a hospital. She's being shouted at by one of the people who was waiting there. She says, "You're disrupting here. You're not welcome here." She says, "I was a good girl, wasn't I? I was a good girl. You ruined this government. Now a nurse is getting involved. You ruined the negotiations. Get out of here. Get out. Now it is your turn. We cannot stay here. We will help right, left, united people without you." And this man is shouting here, "You ruined the negotiations. You ruined it. Get out of here." Just to give people an idea of how angry. And that's a member of the staff there, at the hospital. This next clip that we're about to show you is absolutely heartbreaking. It's the same thing of a relative in the hospital being interviewed about the situation. And we can go ahead and we can put this up there on the screen. What you can see is a couple there who is grieving, in the hospital. And this man is shouting, repeatedly shouting at the camera. He says, quote, "Mr. Prime Minister, go outside, face the media, apologize. 1,000 people were murdered on your watch, sir. Where are you, Ben-Gvir? You are the world champion in bullshitting. Where are you? Mr. Handgun on Twitter, we will never forgive you. Never." And you can see that's actually on a pro-Netanyahu channel there, which is part of why the host ended up cutting him off. But you could see the absolute passion from this man. There are scenes like this breaking out all across Israel. And it's one of the things that we actually really wanted to highlight here on our show to represent that the discourse inside of Israel, Krystal, is so different than what is happening here. Here, if you said anything like that, you would be called an anti-Semite or something. Inside Israel, actual Israelis and Jews are like, no, this is a colossal military failure. It's almost like the reckoning that happened in America for George W. Bush after WMD, except it's happening in real time, immediately after the attack.
Yeah.
And they wise up because they know how much they have had to sacrifice, how much their government has been, how much their society is driven by security. So when you give up all your civil liberties, all your kids have to serve in the military, when you can't get into a mall in Israel without getting wanded down, and then 1,000 of your citizens, which is equivalent to almost 20,000, per capita here in the US, just get murdered overnight, you're like, okay, I'm done. And I think, in America, if let's say we had another 9/11 attack after 9/11, there would have been a similar reckoning. It's only because we were so shocked at what happened at the time that we didn't.
And it was a different era,
it was different.
No
Yeah,
social media.
right.
It was just a different moment. Also, I don't know if we would have had quite the same just rally around the flag and you can't criticize the president. I don't know if it happened today, if it would have quite the same effect. But yeah, in that respect, it is very different. The reaction is very different from 9/11. I mean, I think there has been, you saw all the, all the IDF reservists and members who had been protesting the Netanyahu government. Now they've said, okay, we're coming back, we're getting called up, we're going to report for duty, et cetera. So in that way, you've certainly seen this national unification, but not rallying around Netanyahu. And, I don't doubt that there's like very disparate opinions about the root causes of the problem and who's to blame and all of that. But it seems to me that you've both got like a left of center critique and a right wing critique, which is like you weren't strong enough, you didn't do enough, you were playing footsie too much with Hamas, you weren't cracking down on them and treating them always as the terrorists that they really are. And so you have a sort of, both left and right factions in Israeli politics who are disgusted with his government right now. Remember, this is a man whose supporters styled him, quote unquote, Mr. Security.
Yes.
Like, that's his whole thing. And perhaps more than anyone else in Israeli politics, he has been responsible for this intentional shift away from the previous era of Israeli politicians were, going through, that was the Oslo Accords, and they're going through the process to try to come to some sort of two-state solution with the idea that that would be the real way to achieve security for the Israeli people, which I personally agree is a much better direction. His approach has been to intentionally try to thwart those talks, make a two-state solution impossible through means such as the expansion of the illegal settlements, which makes, stitching together any sort of Palestinian state, again, virtually impossible. And convincing people that, no, you're good. There's no security threat here. Like, we've got it through our high-tech walls, through our through the IDF, through intelligence, through all of the surveillance tech. You don't have to worry anymore. Those fears about security are in the past. I've got you covered. And so when this happens, and it's so horrible, and it's such a shock to the system, and there's so many manifest failures, both in terms of listening to the intelligence that he was clearly given from Egypt and perhaps from his own intelligence services. We don't know about that part. They were conducting war games in Gaza that were ignored. And then the response is a complete failure. So if your whole stake, your whole claim to why you should continue to hold power in spite of the fact that he's been this incredibly divisive figure in Israeli politics is, I will keep you safe. Yeah, this is going to be a strike to the core of your legitimacy as a leader. One other thing I wanted to say, Saagar, about that unity government, because I think the ins and outs of this are kind of important. The other opposition leader, Yair Lapid, has decided to stay out of the government for now, and the reason is that one of his demands is that these two outright very extreme Minister Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, he wanted them sidelined. That's who that irate man relative who was speaking there, that's the person he called out. Ben-Gvir, among other things, is known for having called for an entire Palestinian village to be wiped out, so just outright genocidal talk. Netanyahu refused to completely sideline them from the government. They are sort of like, not directly involved, but they're still included. And so Lapid is staying out of the government for now. You have Haaretz, which again is like the New York Times of Israel, saying, no, don't form a unity government. Netanyahu needs to go first. And that almost is a daily drumbeat coming from left of center press. So there is a real, there's a real reckoning happening right now within the Israeli public, too, about how they want to move forward and how they're going to ever feel safe and secure again.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to understand, Israel is a very complex country. And I mean that in terms of their domestic population. You basically have secular Jews. This is like Tel Aviv, people who live in Tel Aviv, who work in tech. These people, many of them are even atheists. They're culturally Jewish. They're very, probably more akin to like Americans, cosmopolitan, who live in New York City, for example. Then you've got like people who are religious, but who are still, actually a lot like Netanyahu. Somebody who is religious, who is an Israeli nationalist, but who is not ultra-Orthodox or Orthodox Jewish. That is very much like a Netanyahu type figure. The people who I first described, they are very much of like older Israeli society. They are the ones who would support a peace process in the past, support people like the Gantz government, not Netanyahu. The middle type, they break both ways depending. The real like wild card in Israel is the ultra-Orthodox population, which in 25, 30 years ago was, I don't know, maybe 20-something% of the population. But there's a huge fracture in society because the people I described, the right of center and then the left of center people, they are the ones who actually serve in the IDF and in the military.
Right.
The ultra-Orthodox don't serve in the military. They get an exemption. And they also all have like 9 children. And a lot of them are on welfare too. There's actually a ton of resentment, intra-resentment. And they don't even live together, you know, inside of the country. Those people I'm talking about who are really ballooning the population, a lot of those folks are the ones who have really come to play a bigger role in Israeli politics because they have a lot of votes, to be honest. And that's who Netanyahu has been catering to. And these are the folks who are the ones who are like, you know, everything is driven by the Torah and the Hebrew Bible and like which areas can be controlled by Jews. They don't care as much about politics. They're also the ones who are much less likely to support a Palestinian state. They are the ones much more likely to support, you know, the West Bank, the settlers, again, coming up with all of this justification. So that's what people need to understand, I think, about the internal pressures that Netanyahu himself faces. And I think that like you said, those right of center secular types who served in the IDF, they are going to be furious because they're the ones who, you know, really agreed with the security state. And then the left of center folks, to be honest, really the people inside of Israel who are the, you know, the capitalists, the people who are the billionaires who do all the tech work and all of that, they too, I mean, they've had to basically live, you know, in a politics where they have very little representation over the last decade, and then to still have the security failure, I think there actually will be a great secular empowerment inside of Israel after this entire conflict, because they were the ones warning about all of this. They're also, the left center people are very much more likely to hate the settlements. They're the ones who have always been warning about this. So there will be a reckoning.
Yeah.
At least I hope so.
The last thing that I'll say here that I took note of, because he's just such a, he's got whatever else you could say about him, the man has his finger on the pulse. Donald Trump was speaking to a group of, you know, of course, Republican Jewish audience in Florida. And he was critical of Netanyahu. Mm-hmm. And I took special note of that because, I mean, the two are actually, you know, politically kind of similar.
Netanyahu's like Trump, but a lot smarter. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, as evidenced by the fact what he's been in power for like 16 years. I mean, this is... this is a man who he has done whatever needs to be done to get himself back into office. Remember, there were all these elections where they couldn't form a government, and that's how he ends up in league with these incredibly fringe figures because he had to in order to get power back. And part of why he needed to get power back is because he was facing corruption charges that he needed to get out of. Sound familiar in the American political context as well. So anyway, Trump very critical of Netanyahu in front of this Jewish audience in Florida. And so again, just to give you a sense of how widespread the criticism is and how it's not just coming from left of center people, I thought that was very noteworthy because again, he's one who, you know, has a sense of where audiences are moving, what they want to hear at a given moment. And if he didn't think that that audience wanted to hear that right then, there's no way he would have said it. So I took note of that.
You are 1,000% correct.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.